What's up, everyone? My name is Dreas, and I'd like to welcome you to the Fall Creek Redwoods of Santa Cruz County, California. Today, we're going to be checking out a really cool group of creatures called ferns. We're going to cover 3 topics: what ferns are, what the fern life cycle looks like, and what role ferns play in their ecosystem. Let's go see what's out there. The first thing to know about ferns is that they are seedless. They do not use seeds to reproduce. Each stalk of a fern is called a frond, and each frond is made up of leaf-like structures called pinna. Many ferns are deciduous, meaning that at the end of summer, their fronds turn brown and die. In the following year, the fern puts up new fronds that unfurl out of the ground in a structure called a fiddlehead. Ferns are an ancient group of creatures. They were some of the first plants to move from the ocean onto the land over 300 million years ago. Although they might not seem very common today, ferns used to dominate the surface of the earth. In fact, ferns and the swamps where they lived are what turned into the fossil fuels that we use today. For more information on this, we're going to take a quick side trip to Montara State Beach. Hey, what's up? We are at Montara State Beach, about 50 miles up the coast. We're here to check out a rock called lignite, which is going to tell us a little bit more about the history of ferns on our planet. Let's take a look at this cliff face. What sort of patterns do you notice about it? Pause the video and come up with a few ideas. Did you notice the 3 layers? There's the light-colored rock on the bottom, the brown rock on top, and running through the middle, a band of darker rock. That is lignite. This deposit of lignite is over 200,000 years old and is the fossilized remains of a coastal swamp, a swamp that would have been dominated by ferns. Lignite is actually a form of coal, a substance which has played a monumental role in the history of our species. So, the next time you turn on your television or flick your light switch, remember, you might have ferns to thank for that. Back to the forest. In order for us to understand what makes ferns so different from other plants, we need to take a look at the underside of the frond. As we said, ferns do not have seeds. Instead, they reproduce using spores. These spores are held on the underside of the frond. To get a better idea of what's going on here, let's take a closer look at the life cycle of a fern. Let's start with the egg cell of a fern. When a sperm cell makes its way into the egg cell, fertilization occurs. This grows into a young sporophyte. In fact, we're going to use the term sporophyte to describe everything that takes place on the bottom of this diagram. When the egg cell and the sperm cell came together, they each had their own set of genetic information. Therefore, every part of the sporophyte stage has 2 sets of genetic information. The word for this is diploid. The young sporophyte grows into a mature sporophyte. This is the phase of the fern life cycle that we are most familiar with because it is when the fern looks like, well, a fern. Here we have a fern with 2 fronds with pinna running along the length of them. When we take a closer look at the pinna, we see that they are made up of individual pinnules. The pinnules support another group of organs called the sori. Here is a close-up of what the sori look like. Inside the sori is where we will find an organ called the sporangium. This is the organ that makes the spores of the fern. Inside the sporangium, there is a biochemical process called meiosis that creates spores that only have 1 set of genetic information. We now enter the gametophyte stage of the fern life cycle. Every part of this stage involves organisms with 1 set of genetic information. The word for this is haploid. So we had diploid for 2 sets of genetic information and haploid for 1 set of genetic information. Each fern can release hundreds of thousands of spores. When these spores find a place to settle on the forest floor, they grow into a young gametophyte, which soon grows into a mature gametophyte. This shape looks pretty familiar. Pause the video and see if you can identify where else this shape occurs on the diagram. Did you notice that the gametophyte looks like a young sporophyte? Let's go through the rest of the cycle and understand why. The gametophyte is able to produce both egg cells and sperm cells. When there is water in the forest, for example when it is raining or when there is fog condensing, the sperm cells are able to swim through the water into the egg cells. This process is called fertilization, and it takes us back to the beginning when the sperm cell first swam into the egg cell. Now we are back in the diploid generation because we have two sets of genetic information, one from the sperm cell and one from the egg cell. Following fertilization, a young sporophyte begins to grow out of the gametophyte. This sporophyte will develop into a mature sporophyte, or a fern. The pinna of this fern contains sporangium, where the biochemical process called meiosis splits the genetic material in half again. This takes us into the gametophyte stage, where spores are released, which grow into a young gametophyte, then a mature gametophyte, and then leading to fertilization, when egg cells and sperm cells come together. This process can be a little confusing, so feel free to rewatch this section of the video multiple times. The life cycle of ferns helps us understand why water is so important for ferns. The spores need to settle in a wet environment, and the sperm need water to swim through to get into the egg cell. That is why ferns are almost always growing near sources of water. Remember, ferns were some of the first plants to move from the ocean onto the land, so they represent a time when plants hadn't yet figured out how to live in more arid environments, such as the desert. The last question we are going to answer today is what role ferns play in their environment. Ferns add shade to the understory, preventing the loss of moisture by evaporation, and benefiting other creatures that depend on moisture for their survival, such as mushrooms and invertebrates like the banana slug. Another major benefit of ferns is their ability to hold the soil together. A lot of the slopes you'll see in a redwood forest are very steep, and without ferns, these trees might not have the solid ground they need to grow so tall. One of the really important things ferns do for us is serve as an indicator of the local climate. Because many species of fern regrow their leaves each spring, as scientists, we can measure those leaves and use that as an indicator about the amount of precipitation taking place in the forest. When there's more rain or fog, these leaves grow bigger, serving as a sort of biological weather station. Whereas we might only have a few weather stations throughout a mountain range, or none at all, these plants can tell us exactly what is happening in that climate where the plant lives. That is going to be extremely important in our future as our climate continues to change. So if ferns do all of these things for us, the question is, what can we do to support ferns? One thing that you can do is download the iNaturalist app on your smartphone. In the app, you can tag ferns that you see in the places where you visit. When you tag a fern, hit the project button and type in Fern Watch. That will add your data to a larger database. This database is operated by an organization called Save the Redwoods League, who uses the data to support management decisions that protect the redwood forests and the ferns that live there. Alright folks, that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did not know what ferns were before this video, now there's a new creature for you to check out the next time you're in a redwood forest. And if you did know about ferns, hopefully you learned something new. I hope you're all as stoked on ferns as I am, and I'm wishing you all a good rest of your day.